So open adoption is awesome. It's wonderful, but it's not without some challenges. We've had challenges, in just trying to figure out exactly what it's going to look like. And, one of the things a lot of people tell me, well, you can't have open adoption with certain types of people, And, our oldest son's birth father has had a really tough life. No father, no mother. And that's led to a lot of really hard things for him. And he's told us, he said, my life is rough, and we see it. But we still have maintained, from the outside, you could look at him and say, oh, he should not be in somebody's life, in a child's life, in our child's life. But we feel strongly that he should be. Because he still is part of my son is part of him, and so we maintain a relationship that it is what it is. We're friends on social media. He can see what we're doing in our lives. We can see what he's doing in his life. And that's a good boundary for us, and eventually, our son may have more contact with him if he wants to. They've had conversations on the phone. He's been great with him, even though he's had this super difficult life, And I think if people could understand that open adoption doesn't have to be just perfect. I think a lot of families get that one little hard thing and then they just shut things down. Mm-hmm. They get offended or whatever. But how have you guys dealt with maybe just kind of difficult things in open adoption that maybe you could have just said, no more, I'm not going to let this happen,
So we have only had to have one conversation that was one of those hard conversations to have with our birth mom. And we consider our birth mom like a little sister. We are really protective of her. And we just wanted to have a conversation about something that was going on in her life that we didn't feel that was the best thing for her or for Amelia, our little girl. And it was great. It's super scary going in, but I would have had it with any of my siblings. My husband would have had this conversation with any of his siblings. And I think you just have to be okay, go in and have the conversations, and know that it's for the best. You're not doing it to hurt someone's feelings. You're not doing it to be malicious. You're doing it because you love them and you care about them.
And I think too that there's so many levels of openness too. I think people hear open, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're best friends with the birth parents. It's dependent on the situation and who's comfortable with what on both ends and who wants what on both ends. There may be one that kind of chooses to not be as involved and one that wants to be more, and it's just like we've said all along, very individual as it goes. But I think if every situation can at least be approached for what this whole scenario is about, which is about the child and the welfare of the child, then you can kind of get past anything else. You may not necessarily agree with some of the things that they're doing or that they say, but if you're all there for what's best for the child and it benefits the child, then I can get past that. And I can know that as long as this is beneficial for my child, I can support that. It doesn't have to necessarily be about my own relationship with those individuals. But
I think that's so true. With our second placement, it was just kind of rough, and it was really rough for our birth mom, and it was really rough for us. And there was a period of time that she would come to my house, which we had talked about and I was totally fine with, and she would just kind of walk in my house and take my baby out of my arms and go and lay on my couch and cry for a couple of hours. And it was really hard. I would get anxiety when she was coming over, and I didn't want that kind of relationship. I didn't want that for our kiddo, and I knew she didn't want that with me, and I didn't want that with her, but I was terrified of having any sort of conversation with her. And so, but my husband finally said, you can't be a mess every time she comes over. And so we sat down and we chatted with her, and she was able to just really kind of express her feelings. And in my head, I had that she resented us and that she was sad that she'd placed with us, and all of these things. I had made up all of these things in my head as to what I was seeing was going on. But when we sat down and talked to her, that was not the case at all. It wasn't that she resented us at all. It wasn't that she was sad about her decision. She was just sad, and she was grieving the loss of her child. And she expressed to us how much she loved us and how much she appreciated us, and how she knew that she had done the right thing, but that it was just really hard for her. And I was able to talk to her about how I felt like she resented us, and where I was at. And it went from being this really scary conversation to being a really good conversation. The other thing that I think really helped with that was that it opened up the door for her to come to me when there were hard things going on for her. Mm-hmm. And it opened up the door for me to feel comfortable to talk to her in other situations. I think as adoptive parents, sometimes we feel like we can't ever approach hard conversations with our birth families because we should just be grateful. Mm-hmm. We should just be so grateful that we have this baby, and so then we get scared of having hard conversations instead of saying, oh, this is something hard is going on and we need to talk about this. And I think for me it was because I loved her and I knew that open adoption was the best thing for my kid. And the best thing for him was to have her be involved in his life forever. And so it was worth working through the hard thing that was going on with me to be able to have that lifelong relationship. And she felt the same way. And so I think it's just being on the same, you are on the same team. And so sometimes you have to work through hard things to be on the same team.
Right. Yeah. Communication's huge. I think communication, forgiveness, an appreciation of what the situation is, and the realization, like say, that a birth parent isn't exactly who you would want them to be, that's okay. There's a lot of, you probably have aunts and uncles and siblings and stuff that aren't perfect people, and it's okay for imperfect people to be in your child's life, because that's going to teach them something. I don't think most birth parents, even if they're the worst person in the world, aren't going to necessarily drag that child down just by being in a relationship with you. In reality, it can teach kids empathy and understanding, and that you can love people that aren't perfect. You can still care about them, and I think there's a lot of things that everybody can learn from a lot of the difficulties that can come with an open adoption.
Well, and we're not perfect either.
Yeah,
so.
I think people forget that.
I forgot you're perfect.
Yeah, I think you forget that you're not perfect.
And sometimes we do dumb things.
Yeah, I've screwed up, and I've been the one that screwed up the open adoption stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And sometimes our birth families need to be able to call us out on stuff, and that's okay.